Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight to join us for a virtual event in celebration of the release of What Fresh Hell Is This? Perimenopause, Menopause, Other Indignities, and You by Heather Corinna. For this event, Heather will be in conversation with Mona Eltahawy. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore is located is the occupied, unceded, and seized territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people of many nations living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native histories, literature, and communities. And we encourage everybody to learn more about where the bookstore is located and where they are located. And one place to start is by visiting native-land.ca. My name is Carly Nussbaum, and I work as the Outreach and Sales Liaison for Women and Children First. We are one of the last remaining feminist bookstores in the United States, so a big thank you to all of you for being here and supporting us. Our physical bookstore is open in a limited capacity now, but you can also order a copy of What Fresh Hell Is This and more from our website at womenandchildrenfirst.com. And there's also, of course, the convenient Buy the Books box at the bottom of your screen. Events are a vital part of our store's mission, and if you're interested in learning more about our events each month, you can visit our website and/or sign up for our monthly newsletter. Coming up, there are still tickets for a conversation between Ashley Ford and Glennon Doyle for Ashley's new memoir on June 3rd, so make sure to join us then. Now, I have the privilege to introduce the authors who will be in conversation tonight. And just as a reminder, everybody is welcome to ask questions for the authors anytime using the Ask a Question box, also located conveniently at the bottom of your screen. Heather Corinna is a dedicated, queer, feminist, activist, author, educator, artist, teacher, organizer, and innovator. They are the founder and director of Scarletine, the first inclusive and comprehensive sex, sexuality, and relationships education online clearinghouse for young people. Heather is also the author of Sex, the All You Need to Know Sexuality Guide to Get You Through Your Teens and 20s, Wait What? A Comic Book Guide to Relationships, Bodies, and Growing Up, also with Isabella Rotman, and was a contributing editor for the last edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves. Their award-winning work in sex and health education has received widespread acclaim, and Heather is a return visitor to Women and Children First. Mona Eltahawy is an author, activist, and commentator. Her essays and op-eds have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and New York Magazine, among many others. Her books include 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, a manifesto for all feminists in the fight against patriarchy, and Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. Also a return visitor to Women and Children First. And now about this book, What Fresh Hell Is This? Is an amazing fount of compassion, informative guidance, laughter, and community through the book. The candor with which Heather writes about their own experience creates a welcoming space for folks to learn, commiserate, and hopefully find what they may need to embrace or get through this stage of life. I can't tell you how many times I had to pause and shout to whoever was nearest, "Can you believe this?" or "Did you know this?" as I was reading. And just the simple act of sharing this information in this world feels transformative. So I am so grateful to have this book. And on that note, I am so excited to hear the conversation tonight. So without further ado, let's please welcome Heather Corinna and Mona Eltahawy.
Thank you. I think we need to make a quick shout out because by looking at the comments, Aria Bhakti is here, who both is in the audiobook recording of the appendix for this book, but also the first time that Mona and I were able to finally meet in person. We went out with Aria, and Aria, Mona, and I crashed a date of a person who I also see in the comments. So hail, hail, the gang's all here. Thanks so much to everybody for being here and on the book birthday. It's all very exciting, and I have the air conditioning blowing at an unbelievable level right now. So hopefully you can still hear me and it's not like the whole way through. But we thought that we'd open with just kind of a little reading to give you a sense of things, and then we will launch right in. Mona tells me that she has an avalanche of questions, which I'm sure is the truth. So then we'll go right into it. So I'm gonna get started. We'll have a very menopause bedtime story for you here today. If my own experience, and maybe yours, is any indication, perimenopause without realistic expectations or preparation can bear an embarrassing resemblance to the epically terrible movie Castaway. There you are, just going about your life, and then there's a rumble, a couple weird bumps, and then holy shit, the plane is crashing. You wake up in unfamiliar terrain, your hair a mess, drenched in sweat, in a panic, and probably also mysteriously without your top, because isn't that always how it goes? You're freaked out, but you see a coconut or two and expect a quick rescue, so you think you've got this. Sweet, naive you. Soon, you discover you do not have this. You don't know what is going on, what you are doing, or what will help, and there are also no more coconuts. You may flood your porch or lobby with shamefully wasteful boxes full of mostly useless, not to mention money-costing crap that might work for someone else, but sure doesn't work for you. If you find one or two things that do work for you, you may hold on to them with a questionable attachment and a paranoid ferocity, ready to slice the fingers off anyone who comes near them. This very much includes the thermostat. This can be that kind of adventure, and it pains me to say so, including because I really hate that movie. It might not be. For some people, it really isn't. For some people, it's only a bad vacation, if that. For some, it's totally mellow, until it isn't. And if that's how it goes for you, you're sure going to kick yourself if you weren't gathering what you needed to make a raft while everything was so lovely and delightful. From everything I've read and otherwise taken in, from everyone I've listened to and my otherwise now massively expanded sense of things, I have absolutely had a harder time with this than most. I would not say that my experience of perimenopause has been a good approximation of average. Thus far, mine has been a very castaway perimenopause. I have known love for more than one proverbial bloody volleyball. I didn't have to learn to make fire because I was, and often still am, on fire. I existed in a solitary and desperate survival mode for a long time there, but I have survived, so far anyway. Those of us who have the most difficult of times, though, appear to be the minority. What we know from research so far is that more people will have an easier time or have it last a shorter period of time, and some of you will have little to no trouble at all. On top of some of the other things I already mentioned earlier, I was a lifelong smoker with pre-existing disabilities, including severe spinal degeneration and injury, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and mystery reproductive issues. And I also have a brain and neurological system that's never been all that keen on the rules. I'm sensitive to hormonal shifts and have a history of depression, suicidality, and sexual, physical, and emotional trauma. I spent my first 5 years or so of perimenopause very unsupported emotionally and gaslighted on the daily. I've had nonstop crises throughout, unexpectedly semi-acquired 2 adolescents in my personal life and very small apartment. You get the picture. I was also highly uninformed and completely unprepared. Luckily for us both, I now know some of why I've been having such a hard time. I know that those things I mentioned are parts of what's made it tougher for me. I know some of what I could have done about it, which I didn't know before too. I now know a lot more, period, which all by itself makes a surprising amount of difference. I also know a lot more about what we all still don't know, which, despite being awfully annoying, is sometimes oddly helpful too. You can't change history, including your own life history. You can't change your genetics. You can't change how your life has gone up until now, and if you're like a lot of us, you probably can't change a great deal of your current circumstances either. That means there's some perimenopause and postmenopause you can't change. But you can change some of it, including just by accepting it and yourself in it, and you can manage a lot of it. A great deal of research makes clear that when we come into this phase just basically educated about it and realistically prepared and supported, we will have better experiences. If it hasn't even started for you, just reading this book is likely to make it go all better when it does. And I don't say that just to flatter myself. Even if it's already started for you, even if it already stinks, you can probably improve the experience you're having just by finding out more about it. This is not one of these books where I, the great and powerful Corinna, have solved the mystery of menopause, ta-da, for myself, and now can solve it for you, so that we all have a wonderful time and experience and revere this phase of life as nothing but a glorious passage of sparkly wisdom and wonder. I did not solve that mystery. The idea of my being the master of menopause is also hilarious, because let me tell you, I am menopause's dog. You're going to have to look elsewhere for mastery. This isn't the Everything You Need guide. Everything You Need isn't going to be in any book, let alone this one. And even if it were, we both know you wouldn't have half the patience you'd need to read its 8,000 pages, let alone the energy to drag it up 3 flights of stairs from the lobby. Understanding, acceptance, and management, or not, of your choosing really are the names of the game here. They are what's actually doable and also won't make you feel even shittier about yourself than perimenopause can make you feel already. As disability activist, writer, and my genius friend S.E. Smith pointed out when we talked about this, just like with disability and disabled people, so much historical and current messaging about menopause and those of us in perimenopause and postmenopause treats it and us as something capital B broken in need of repair. There's this idea that to be right or balanced, we need to try and keep or make ourselves, our hormones, and our bodies as premenopausal as possible, rather than accepting that we, our bodies, and our hormones are always right, even if we don't always feel comfortable or love or are valued by our culture in every phase of them. This book isn't about fixing you, your hormones, or any other part of your body. I think you're just right, even if you, probably like me right now, happen to be fucking miserable in this particular moment. I'm not here to fix you. I'm just here to try and help you get through this hot mess. And with that, I see Mona.
Heather, what a delight to be talking with you about something that is so fucking miserable.
Same.
And I have to begin, the way I begin everything, which is with my declaration of faith, fuck the patriarchy, because it goes to the core of so much that we're going to talk about. So, before I begin with my endless questions for you, I want to share with everyone here. Thank you, everyone who's here. What happened that night that we met at Women and Children First, and we got to know Aria, and then we went out to dinner. And I knew that you were writing a book about perimenopause and menopause, and I said to you, "Oh, I'm so excited about your book, but I think I'm in perimenopause. But how long does this fucking thing last?" And then you said, "Oh, between 10 to 14 years." And I almost joked. I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Because, here I am, feminist giant. And I thought, my period, I'm going to have a few months of something's going to happen to my body. I'll feel a bit hot. My period will stop. And that's it. I'm like, oh my God. So when you told me this, it was like going back through this kind of inventory of things that had been happening to me that I finally realized this is it. So thank you for writing this book. Where were you 10 years ago?
At the beginning of this.
I wish I had known you.
I didn't know either, right? I felt like you did. I thought all the things that you thought, and then maybe that I wouldn't want to have sex as much. That was it. Those were the things that I thought would happen, right? I'd be cranky for a little bit. I wouldn't want to have sex as much, and my period would stop. And that would be, that was it. That was the end of that. Joke's on me.
On all of us. So it's actually, let's go back to that beginning moment, because I have so many questions, but my initial one is, tell us about the health scare that, when I was reading about it, that happened in 2013. Sounds like it was this very kind of germane moment, this kind of light bulb moment. What the fuck? Was that the moment you said, I'm going to write this book? But tell us about this moment, and was that the connection?
Sure. I mean, basically what happened was I had a hot flash, but I didn't know that I was having a hot flash, right? I had, I've had so many different things wrong with me, right? I have a seizure disorder. I have a migraine disorder. I had already a chronic pain disorder with my spine that was going on. So I'm one of those people too, that it's like, it's never like, is something wrong with me? It's like, what thing is wrong with me? Which thing is it? Is it a thing I already have wrong with me? Is it a new thing that's wrong with me? Right. And so it was a whole bunch of things, but hot flashes are weird because you can think that from what you hear about them culturally, that you know what they'll feel like. But one, I feel like unless you're expecting them, you probably aren't thinking about them. And I don't think I was expecting them, especially not in my early 40s. Again, I think I thought that was one of those things, maybe that was like a postmenopausal thing. I don't really think I thought of that as something that happened before you hit menopause, right? But also too, I didn't think, like, I had a panic attack at the same time that I had it. Now I know this. Now I also know that that's really quite common, probably in part too, when you don't know what the fuck is going on and you think you're having a heart attack. Unfortunately, because, so many people in the healthcare industry are just as uneducated about all this as we are, a lot of people thought I was having a heart attack, even though my pulse was perfectly fine. The EKG was normal. I wound up sent, I was living at that time in a rural place. We didn't have a hospital, so I went sent in a ferry over the water. It was just it was a whole thing. It was 2 weeks before I got health insurance. It was this insane, ginormous bill that I wound up having. And at the time, I left there with nobody had any answers. Nobody, despite, again, I'm in my 40s. I still have a uterus, now knowing what I know, had I been working in the hospital that time, I would have been like, hey, did anybody check with that person about if they know anything about perimenopause, right? Like, I know, but nobody there did. And so at the time, I left with it being a mystery. I didn't leave now. Only now, kind of like you're saying after the conversation that we had, only once I kind of started looking back and I knew more things that I was kind of like, oh, when did this start? Oh, that's the first time that it happened, right? Because, more times it started to happen and other things happened. So, and I think that sometimes it's like this, for those of us who have chronic illnesses, like, I have chronic fatigue. It's one of these diagnoses of exclusion, in a lot of ways. This is one of these things of exclusion where you look at things and it's like, you don't have this wrong with you. It's not your thyroid. You're not pregnant. You don't have cancer. You don't have whatever. But then you have all these things that happened and you kind of put them in the box. And then you look at the age you are, right? And you go, oh, this is what it is. But it took me a long time, which, like you say, should be surprising. I've worked in sexual and reproductive health for a couple of decades. I felt really foolish that I didn't know any of this. I felt like I should know any of this, even though I mostly work with young adults, but still, and again, I've, been a feminist. I've worked in an abortion clinic. I should know all of these things, but I really didn't.
All right. In case anyone's wondering, I'm muting and unmuting. What happened to Heather?
Hold on.
Come back.
What did I do?
I think you turned your camera off.
I did.
Come back. This is about you, not me. It's okay. This is all part of the roller coaster, right? This is a roller coaster. All that's missing is a drink just to smooth things along after the event. All right. No, I was really struck by the number of people that you spoke to for the book, because I love the premise of the book from the beginning, where you say this is a book for all of us. everyone who is going through perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, not just cisgender women, not just white women, not just able, privileged, straight women. And when I know that whenever I talk about being perimenopausal on social media, that is immediately kind of like the entry point for so many people, where it's a woman's thing. It's mostly white women who respond to me to talk about it, and the books that have come out are mostly by and for all of those people. And that's why I love the kind of the array of people you speak to. And one of them is Leah, who said to you, I mean, you quote her several times, but the quote that I'm going to repeat here is when she says, "I think for a lot of people, perimenopause is kind of a collision course with parts of the patriarchy and sexism and oppression." And I think that so encapsulates it. So tell us a bit more about Leah and how you decided who you would interview. I'm sure it was tons of people, but which voices you wanted to bring across in your book.
It wasn't easy. There's a couple of things too, especially because, one, I was asking people to talk to me. Especially when a lot of the people that I wanted to talk to the most were a lot of women of color. So it was a very big ask for me to be making at the time, to say the least. And everyone was obviously in quite a space to be having these conversations. So it was a big ask. It was a big give for anybody to be talking to me at that time. I still didn't talk to as many people as I wanted to talk to, because so many people didn't have the ability, just didn't have any bandwidth at the time. I also, though, too, got overambitious in how many people I wanted to talk to. I don't usually do the kind of book where I get to talk to a whole bunch of people. And I didn't really plan this from the beginning. Before I did this book, I hadn't read a lot of menopause books to really understand how kind of, generic so many of them were. I really, like I told you, I didn't know going in, and it's kind of really something as a white person going in. I didn't know how white a field it was. It's not surprising, obviously, especially because it's health books, and health as a field really is, but I really didn't realize. And so it was kind of something that it was like, oh, we need to do this in a particular way. But I think also too, I wasn't really, I wasn't prepared for how amazing those conversations were either, right? And I got really hungry for them. Once I had one, I'd want to have another one. And I, every time that I talked to somebody, kind of a different switch would flick, and then it would change who I wanted to talk to. And who I talked to, I really didn't talk to like a lot of menopause people. There's a couple people, Omishade that works in menopause. I talked to Omishade, and Dr. Deborah Hirsch, who works in menopause. I talked to her, but really and Nina Koslov that does Women Living Better. Besides those three people, everybody else that I talked to, menopause is not like what they do, right? It's kind of can intersect with things. And so also that was really interesting, right? Being able to have these conversations with people that they really work in something else. So, and a lot of the people that I talked to also too, I wanted to make sure that, let me turn this back. So much of what's been written about and said about menopause in most of history has been written and said by people who have never themselves experienced it, lack the ability to themselves experience it, right? So for one, in my research, except for the historical part, which, everyone should know that in chapter 2, you need something to throw things at, or I don't know, someone to yell at, or it's necessary. I had to read those people for that section because it was a history review, but otherwise I tried to only even read people that at least had written about this who could have themselves experienced it if they didn't. But I also knew that in who I wanted to talk to, I did not want to be talking to anybody who either did not themselves experience it or could not themselves experience it, because that was one thing that I wanted to just kind of end. Like, I think that we have all heard more than enough of people talking about our lives and our bodies who can't possibly know anything about our experience. So that was kind of the other interesting thing about having everybody that I talked to, have some stake in the lived experience.
I've been doing a lot of reading about a pharaoh called Hatshepsut. Being Egyptian, I'm writing a book that pharaoh will be mentioned in, and I only recently discovered that Hatshepsut changed pronouns. So sometimes she, sometimes he, sometimes they, and is known as the king herself. And I love that title. It's probably going to be the working title for my book. And in reading about Hatshepsut, who was the most powerful person in the world for 20 years during, I think it was the New Kingdom of the ancient, anyway, in ancient Egypt, yeah? So Hatshepsut just was incredible for infrastructure and building and everything. But in wondering why I didn't know that Hatshepsut changed or used different pronouns, I learned. And I think this is almost identically applicable to perimenopause and menopause, that it depends on who is studying and writing about Hatshepsut. Because at first, archaeologists were all of these white colonial imperialist fucks, So everything they wrote about Hatshepsut was really, really sexist, patriarchal, imperialist bullshit. And then some cis women entered into archaeology and they started to use a feminist lens, but it was very white and very cisgender. And then queer archaeologists started writing, and then they, claimed Hatshepsut for themselves. So I kind of feel that you're doing that with perimenopause, because you've got the colonial imperialist shits who are the evil doctors, and you give God the history of perimenopause that they owned, and then just over the past 25 years, like you say, it's only 2 generations. It's like, more and more information, but still, largely held by the medical establishment, which used to be white men, but now is a lot of white women. And now, we need more accessible information. So I consider you like the queer archaeologists who've dug up Hatshepsut for us and said the king herself.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, yeah, I think, and it's who was able to be served by the medical establishment with any kind of power in that medical establishment, right? And that's the same thing that comes up also too. And I think we've talked about this a little, you and I, about why don't we know things about this, right? And I've said that, right, like in my family, on my father's side, the women didn't live long enough to experience menopause. And my mother's side, my mother was the first one to not have, hysterectomies, right? So, and that's the case for a lot of working class families, immigrant families, BIPOC families, right? Like that and that's again what it is one of these things. Well, why didn't we know about it? Well, for a lot of us, we didn't know about it because it's only first or second generation in our family that we even get to experience perimenopause in the first place. And then that's before we can even have the conversation about, again, who's in the position to talk about when we're suffering, right? And how safe are we also too to say that we're suffering is another thing. To whom would we even say it, right? It's if we even just think a generation or 2 back, who in our family would they have said that to?
Okay. Something else that we talked about that I want to bring in before I move off the medical establishment and who owns perimenopause is the pressure to have a good menopause, or all of these images that we have. Because when I started talking about perimenopause on social media, I was very cognizant of the kind of similar pressures that are brought to bear when we talk about menstruation, in that if we complain, if we are people who menstruate, or if we are people who go through perimenopause, if we complain, and especially if in this case we are cisgender women, it's like, yeah, that's exactly why we don't want women in the workplace, in whatever, you and your hormones, all that stuff. But if we don't talk about it honestly, then we're doing a massive disservice to those who know so little. So what do we do? How do we avoid this good menopause crap? And how do we talk about it in an honest way that isn't then, weaponized, for lack of a better term, by the patriarchy and all those other, fucks out there who want to weaponize it against us?
I think that's really great that you bring it up, because I definitely think that the silencing that happens around this is some backlash from people responding to the well, you don't want to talk about how you're impacted by this, because then you're feeding into that, oh, it's so hormonal thing, which you've asked everyone to not say about you through how many decades of cycles, right? And I get it. It feels like a trap, right? Where you're like, ugh, well, how can I now say that I'm being impacted by my hormones when I've told you to shut the fuck up about my fucking hormones, and it's not my fucking hormones? What's your problem, right? But now you're like, yes, it is. and actually, yes, it was, right? And the problem wasn't ever, the problem wasn't ever that it wasn't your hormones. The problem was, one, it wasn't ever just your hormones. It was your hormones and whoever the fucking asshole was talking like such a dick about the way that your hormones were affecting you. Because the problem was that person, whoever it was that you felt the need to say that to, whether it was a single person or an entire culture, right, wasn't treating you empathetically. They were using that as a weapon, or using that as a way to lock you out or put you down, or all of those things, right, or oppress you, instead of as a way to say, oh, you need a little care, or you need an accommodation around this, or any number of things, right, that we would do if we were being humane to people. And that's, I think that's really the thing now. But I also think that, I think that now it's one of these things where we just kind of have to decide if we're going to claim it. And now we know, right? We can look back and know and say we didn't feel safe and able to say what was going on, because you didn't give us the space to do this. You didn't give us the permission, and you weren't actually going to make accommodations. You were, as you just said, just going to use this against us. Right. Whereas if you were to come and say, oh, I feel sick, we would be like, let me make you soup. Right. Not, what are you trying to get out of? What's wrong with you? What is this weakness of this flu that you have? But I do think, the tricky thing and what it asks of us is it does ask for us to be more vulnerable. But I think the thing to bear in mind is that, right now, the numbers are in our favor. This is one of the largest cohorts of about to be menopausal people that has ever existed. Right. So if we all just have each other, right, if we are all just supportive of each other in this, it doesn't really matter if the minority of people are dicks about it.
Yeah, I totally hear you, because, I was born in Egypt, as you know. I'm Egyptian and of Muslim descent. And I only recently learned that of this kind, and this is brand new, of an advertising campaign. And this also leads into questions of how corporations and advertising and the co-opting by corporations, but I mean that's a whole other, yeah. And you talk about it in your book, of course, that just, and on social media, how much money they want to make out of us. But there was this ad recently by some company that does, I think they do adult pads for incontinence. It's this big health kind of company. And they did an ad in Arabic that was launched in Saudi Arabia, because they did a survey of Saudi women and they asked them, they said, look, the phrase for menopause in Arabic is age of despair. I'm like, oh my God, I remember when I was younger, it's called the age of despair in Arabic. And they said, look, do you like this phrase? Of course, the majority of women said, no, we don't. So they asked them to come up with alternatives. And it's this beautiful ad of Saudi women. You know, one is an artist, one is a singer, one is an I don't know what. And they're like smashing like all these vases and things that represent the age of despair and coming up with new phrases, you know, because they are part of this cohort that you're talking about, that we are now saying, fuck this shit. This is not despair, you know? And that takes me to my next question about how you talk beautifully about looking for perimenopause and menopause in artists and people you love, like Stevie Nicks, like Maud in Harold and Maude, like, you know, the character, the Kristen Scott Thomas character in Fleabag. So tell me about the importance, and this is another form of archaeology now. Tell me about the importance of digging for those menopausal parts of menopause of people that we admire, not just women, people that we admire, who then we can say, this is not the end, like you said, this is not about loss. This is about something on the other side.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have to take some responsibility. Like I've heard a lot of people, and I've heard this in my own head, you know, I've heard myself say this of like, you know, there's a lot of like, why didn't anybody tell me this? Why didn't anybody show me this? Why don't I see any people post-menopause? And really, like, that's the question, I think, to like tear out of that whole thing and put it there, because I think that part, that's us. Why don't we see any people post-menopause isn't about nobody's showing us those people, because those people are everywhere. Those people are on the bus, you know, like those people are on the street. Those people live in our building. Like, that's really about, a lot of it is because we're not choosing to look for those people, and we're our own ageism, our own sex, like, you know, all of the things that are intersecting to make us, that we've certainly learned them, right? Like, but still it's in us. We've learned to not see those people. That's why we're not seeing those people. So for one, we have to take responsibility to have the process of being like, oh shit, I have to start unlearning that thing so that I can start seeing those people. Like when you hear people say, oh no, I'm so worried about invisibility, there doesn't seem to be a lot of process of like, oh, wait a minute, I've participated in invisibility, right? Like, you know, on so many levels. It's just that I think that there's an interesting thing that needs to happen there to do it. But I do think that even when you say something like it was just Stevie Nicks' 75th birthday the other day, right? Stevie Nicks had this terrible menopause, apparently, by the way, terrible. But did this great album, like Trouble with Shangri-La. It was right after her terrible menopause. It's a really good album. But it was her 75th birthday, and all across Twitter, happy 75th birthday, Stevie. Every picture was like Stevie Nicks under 35, right? Like, and it's that exact thing, right? That it's like, what is going on? Like, what are you doing? Even from people like our age, right? That I'm like, why are you putting pictures of Stevie Nicks at 25 on her 75th birthday? She's 75 years old. She's left the house. There's pictures of her, right? Like, she's not hiding. But it's that thing, right? Is I think that one, again, we have to actually see people and not keep trying to remember them as young people. And when I say them, I also mean us, right? We do that, I think, a lot of ourselves, is to kind of keep remembering ourselves as young people. We need to kind of stay with ourselves and stay with everybody else and keep trying to get to know other people too, you know, as like, and that's not to say that we can't appreciate who people were, you know, who we were before, but I do think that we need to really keep looking. And it does take some work, because we've all learned, it's a very ageist culture that we live in, you know, almost every culture. I mean, there's some exceptions, but pretty unilaterally around the world, there's a lot of ageism that we've all been soaking in. So we have to work at it.
Absolutely. I mean, you will remember that when we talked, I told you that one of the reasons that I shaved off all my hair was because I wanted to make space for what I was becoming. You know, I didn't want, it was the pandemic as well, but it was also perimenopause because I was finally paying attention. And what you said about the pictures of Stevie Nicks was exactly that. I didn't want to be stuck looking like what I looked like before I finally discovered it was going to take fucking 10 years. And I was like, no, I'm going to make room for this now. I'm going to focus on this fucking perimenopause. Look, we've got 5 more minutes together. I could talk to you forever. But I want one last question before I turn. So everyone, post your questions on Ask a Question so I can then ask Heather. But I've got one more question for you that's kind of like, I'm going to try and wrap up a whole bunch of loose ends here. So Dr. Lex told you that she talks about the change as a catalyst for bigger things when she says, I think this can be when people who are born with a uterus start to get the empowerment of quitting the idea that self-sacrifice equals goodness. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I loved how very soon after, you know, you say, look, it was never about the hormones. It was never about the hot flashes. It was always about us and who we are, and this person that we are is going through this, and we will still be there, you know, like on the other side. So I love that how both of those center what you talk about radical self-care and radical self-centering, and using those to fight against loss. Now I've just combined out like 5 or 6 things, but for me they really struck me as like one effectively. Because you said, because this is towards the end of the book, but you said earlier that unlike puberty and pregnancy, perimenopause is always associated with loss. And I think this is why people hold on to the old them, the old picture, how I used to look, how I used to be, rather than what I am becoming. So I love this, the way that you combine all of those and say, fight against this idea of this as being loss and think of adaptation. So let's talk about what we're becoming. Who are you becoming?
Yeah. I mean, or if it must be lost, there are some things that we could stand to lose, you know, like Lex was talking about. We could stand to lose being, you know, the giant human octopus of care for everyone. We could all stand to lose that if we are that thing. We could stand to lose centering everyone else and coming in last with everything. So, I mean, certainly this is one of these things where it's not great to have a bad experience with this, like, you know, especially because it can last, right? And so you're like, whoa, but it is one of those things where if and when you do, you have to pay attention to it then, right? Like you're like, oh shit, I have to deal with it because it's not going to stop and it's not going away and I'm in it and I can't just compartmentalize it because it's a whole systems thing. And then you have to do things, right? And so, you know, a lot of it is, again, you know, there's a million different ways to come at this, right? And whether or not you do things like you go to the doctor and you use medications or you don't use medications, you change things with your exercise or your diet or you don't, even if you do any of those things, you still will have to usually change things like how much time are you going to be spending on yourself? How much are you going to be focusing on yourself? And in that process, you're generally kind of evaluating the like, oh, wait a minute, what was going on here before? And what's coming is really the next thing, right? Like, for as much as we have to take care of ourselves now, we're getting older. We're only going to have to take care of ourselves more. So if we don't already have the kind of support that we need in this, the kind of time and space that we need to take care of ourselves in this, you know, the kind of social setup and life that we need that really makes room for us to be cared for in this, like, we're fucked. You know, like after this, and who would want that life anyway? I mean, that's really the thing. Like, we have to want to live the rest of those lives. And why would we want to live the rest of our life without those things. Half the time, if we've gotten here without those things, we're like, how do we even manage to get this far, this long? And we feel it if we have, I have. I mean, we all have, like, the things that we've somehow scrabbled here to live without, and generally have hungered for the whole time. I think one of the good parts about this is sometimes by the time that you get here, you just can't go without them anymore. Like, it's not going to let you. You're just you have to go for the good stuff because your body's like, yep, nope, sorry, no more crap for you. Which, there's nothing bad about that.
Exactly. And I urge everyone to read every single page, and I promise you at the end, it's like, fuck yes. So thank you, Heather. I'm now going to start the questions because we have a few here. And okay, here's the first one. This is from Alta. As a relative of a female biologist specialized in women's issues, I'm shocked at how little scientific data is available and how few studies have been done on this. Aside from anecdotes, did you find other resources to compensate for this knowledge gap? Thanks for being here.
I mean, there definitely, we've got studies over the last 5 years. They're still white is one thing, there's still, we're just kind of getting there to where they're definitely getting a little bit more diverse. And they're still relatively small. Again, over the last 10 years, getting there. But the good news is that, some of these bigger studies in those times, some of them are still running. Right. So a lot of these studies that have happened, and have been happening over the last 25 years, some of them are very long-term studies that are still going. So we're getting there. I think the thing is that because some of them are really long-term studies, because at the start of some of these studies, we kind of had some boneheaded reporting. We certainly had, we still have, we will always have, but we definitely in the first 10, 15 of the academic information for those studies, and I think that is the bigger problem, right? When it comes to these studies, is any of us being able to get the information if we're not doctors, right? Is the gatekeeping of this information, I think, is the bigger problem because, we don't get to decide then how it's used and how it's disseminated and what we see of it. And that will be something to change. One of the very first people that I wanted to talk to when I did this book, because I always want to talk to her about anything, because I can, and I still can't believe that she lets me talk to her, is Judy Norsigian, who's one of the founders of Our Bodies, Ourselves. And the very first person that Judy was like, you have to talk to her, is Nina Koslov, who runs a site called Women Living Better, which the name, like a lot of women's health centers, is obviously not particularly inclusive, but Nina's actually been working on making the content pretty inclusive. And Nina's been doing some studies that basically Nina is releasing the reporting. So that's something to keep your eye on. And hopefully that's something that more people will be modeling too with studies.
Okay, now we have a question from Veronica. What is the most mind-blowing thing you learned about menopause?
Amar just looked at me like, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think I saw everybody's reactions here. The thing of, that it can go a really long time definitely was not, I think it blows everybody's mind. It definitely blew my, I'm like at year 8 or 9 at this point. So at this stage, it's not all that shocking for me because here I am. But it's not even just that it can go that long. I think for me, when I was trying to find out, I expected that I could get one good answer where all the sources agreed, right? Like, and I couldn't. Like, I turned into my editor 3 pages of different answers from like 40 different places. And she was like, Heather, you cannot give this to people. They will hurt you. No, but it really, and one, I mean, I think that is representative of just how diverse we all are, right? Like, I mean, really, it's billions of people. Of course. I mean, of course it's that diverse. Of course it is. But it definitely was shocking that it can absolutely be that long. But I think the other thing too is that, for me, and a lot of this for me too, was that it really messed with my mental health in a really big way. And I definitely had the idea that kind of the mood stuff that happened in this was really surfacey, that it was like grumpy stuff. I was not prepared, which is really dangerous for me. I'm a suicidal person. I've been a suicidal person since I was a kid. For me to not know this, that can be way, way more than grumpy stuff, that there can be very, very serious mental health challenges and impacts of perimenopause and menopause. So I think, that's another really big one in there. There's so many. I mean, they're in there. That sounds so like Tupperware lady. Read my book.
Well, before I ask you the next question, I really love how you say, look, these aren't symptoms. This is not an illness. These are effects of, things that you will experience, but let's move away from this symptoms thing. So read the book and you learn about more effects. So here is a question that has also been voted on quite a few times. So I'm going to ask it ahead of others. This one says, when it comes to media treatment, what are the biggest misrepresentations, the most damaging tropes, and or the worst disinformation about perimenopause and or about menopause itself? And this is from Jen.
Gosh. I mean, I definitely do think that we get the impression that it's much older people. Like, even when you see the pictures of people in menopause, it's always people like in their late 50s and 60s. So one, I think that's always a problem, because then we have this expectation that we shouldn't expect anything until way later, and that can really mess you up. Certainly, I think that the endless representation that this happens to nothing but cisgender women is a very, very, very big problem. Another really big one that unfortunately remains really sticky is that only white women have a difficult menopause, which really actually, especially when you look at a lot of the research that happens here, that doesn't even hold necessarily true, but there's a lot of really messed up tokenism that happens too around this. Like, there's a really gross narrative around how Asian women, like, you could somehow sum up that number, like it's like 5 women or something, that Asian women all have a fine menopause because everyone eats tofu. I mean, like, it's really weird, gross, oversimplified stuff. And usually when you dig into that a little bit, someone will say because they've done studies and no one's complaining. I mean, like, it's really, so there's a lot of that that happens. And that is a big one too, right? That we can determine who is having a better or a worse time by who is complaining is obviously particularly problematic, especially when, again, you really consider when you're talking about women of color. It's really, really, really bad, because we don't live in a world in which women of color are given permission to complain when they're suffering at all. So to make it about who is complaining is really extra bad. Gosh, gee golly, to make it that it's all vaginal, right, or sexual, or about looks, I think is really problematic. Especially in a lot of ways, because that's kind of a trap, right? Like, it almost kind of perpetuates this thing where you're led to believe, so many of us, really, no matter how we identify our gender, right? If we were assigned female sex at birth, then we've kind of spent so much of our lives being categorized in such a way that we are here for a sexual purpose. And then if it's continued to believe that everything that could go wrong with this for us, or everything that changes is a sexual thing that then we have to fix, we're kind of led astray into thinking that, oh, we still need to stay hyper-focused on our sexual utility, right? Like, God forbid we lose our sexual utility in any way. So that's not great either. I could go on, obviously. For, many pages.
Okay. Before the next question, I have someone here is saying, how are you two and this conversation so immensely healing in so little time? I could watch you all talk forever. Oh, we could talk forever, believe me. When Heather and I get on Zoom or something, we talk forever. Okay, let me see what the other questions are here. We actually have a question about sex. Could lowering of libido be perimenopausal? Well, sex drive rather than just sex.
Yeah. It can, but it doesn't have to be. It's one of those things that's really diverse. Some people have sexual desire go down, some people have it go up, but also, again, given how long this lasts for people, what's really more normal is for people to have times where it's up and for people to have times where it's down. But I think that one of the things to also think about in this is that even when it changes to sexual desire in perimenopause, it may or may not be about hormones. It can also be about things like body image. It can also be about things like, do you expect to think this? Do you think that your value is different when you're in this? Is your partner or partners treating you differently in all of this? Are you listening to your friends bitch and moan all the time when you're in this? Like, there's just kind of so many, are you exhausted, right? Like, that's really the biggest thing. There's so many of the ways that we feel that are crappy in perimenopause boil down to sleep deprivation. And one of the biggest things I'll tell you as a sex educator that gets in the way of people's sexual desire is that people aren't sleeping well. And so, yeah, if you're not sleeping well and you're sleep deprived, it's really hard to get excited about sex when really you're just tired. So yeah, I mean, that can happen just like it can in any other time of life, but it's sometimes really hard to piece out, like, one, is it perimenopause? And then if it is, which part and for what?
Okay, another question here. I think we can squeeze one more in. Not directly perimenopause related, but how do you navigate ageism within the context of working with and on behalf of young people? And this is from Sarah.
I'm just starting to try because I work with young people every single day. So it's definitely been, the people that I work with, at Scarlettine, my whole staff, I'm not only the only person over 50, I'm the only person over 40. There's only like 2 people that work there over 30. And then everybody we serve is under 30. So, I'm kind of just getting there. It's a lot of gentle call outs. I'm trying to get really good at gentle call outs, even with the 2 kids that are living here at home now. But it's hard because you take it personally. You can't not take it personally. Here you are, the aging person. But I think that you should say how it feels, I mean, that's kind of one thing I've been trying to kind of say when something hurts my feelings, because I think it's important to say when it hurts our feelings. I mean, I think the good thing about being an older person talking to younger people is that we both understand age discrimination, right? Like, I mean, that's something that we both can relate to. We're on different sides of that pendulum, but we're both in a world where younger people and older people know what it feels like. So I think that we can have those conversations, but I definitely think that they're not easy to have. I don't have easy answers.
Well, Heather, I think I have one more question, so perhaps I can get to it because we still have like just under a minute. What has been the best part of perimenopause for you both? But I want you to answer it, Heather. All love and thanks. And this is Sham. Hey, Sham! Oh my gosh, she's a great artist. Go and book her for art. I love you. Happy Pride.
What has been the best part? I mean, you know, I do definitely feel a little bit freer to be myself. Like I am not one of these people that has been full of an overabundance of confidence. Like you know, it's taken me a long time in the world to feel like I deserve to be here, you know, like, and that has taken a really long time. And so I'm there. I kind of got there. And I think, you know, the best part of this is that I don't think that I could have gotten through this if I also was not just like, well, I have to just be myself. And even just in writing this book, you know, I was trying to write this book and it's the pandemic and I'm in perimenopause and my whole life is exploding, that I was like, oh, I just have to be myself because I can't. Like, there's no time in the day to do anything else. And I think that this kind of feels like this too. And it's good. I actually, you know, it's one of these things where I think that teenage me would be pretty happy with myself right about now. And they were pretty critical of me. So yeah, you know, something that you talk about kind of looking towards the other side. I feel like that.
Well, Heather, I could have talked to you for hours and hours and hours, and I'm really glad that we are celebrating you and your book on the first day of Pride, because I hope everyone who has been watching and listening to us and who will buy the book spreads the word about this being a wonderful book that is inclusive of us all. The cis and trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming and everyone, people who are going through perimenopause and menopause. So on that note, I want to wish everyone a happy Pride. I want to wish you congratulations for your wonderful book, Heather. And I send everyone love and solidarity and fuck the patriarchy as always. And thank you.
Thank you, Mona.
Yes, and I too wanted to say, oh my gosh, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. Thank you so much to Heather and Mona for this amazing conversation. Like, I hope you get a chance to look through the chat at some point because it was just so full of love and appreciation. So congratulations again on the book. And after the broadcast ends, the recording will be available here at this link, and it will be eventually posted to YouTube as well with captions. So remember to go out and get the book, everybody. And I hope everybody has a great night. Thank you.